We're recording. Hi, everyone. I'm tuning in today to talk about the Waldorf curriculum and Rudolf Steiner a little bit, and my feelings about those things, and communication and play. I'm just going to kind of riff on what's been up for me. So, a little bit about how this plays into my life. This job just landed in my lap in December of last year to teach at a Waldorf school part-time. And I've always been into education and curriculums. When I was doing early childhood work on myself, I was also studying things like radical unschooling and homeschooling and Waldorf and, you know, Montessori, different kinds of curriculums and how they relate to the development of the child. And that's kind of how I processed my inner child stuff, was through this research, a little bit in part. And at the time, of course, I never thought I'd be a teacher because of who I am as a person. And I've learned over time, of course, how to relate to children safely, even though I am a sex positive, polyamorous cam girl and sex witch. Part of my responsibility in that role is to understand how to respectfully and consensually speak to children of all different developmental capacities about the things that I value. Not talking to children about it isn't effective. It breeds shame. So the point is, I get this job at a Waldorf school, knowing a little bit about Waldorf education. What I did not know at the time was how Waldorf curriculum really intersected with spirituality. I had no idea. When I was studying it before, I wasn't as witchy. So I just wasn't even looking for that kind of stuff. And so now, this second time around, when I am a little more in my mysticism, I get this Waldorf job and I'm re-studying all of this Waldorf stuff, and I'm following these breadcrumbs to Rudolf Steiner, who is a mystic and an academic who developed this curriculum based on this philosophy that children and their souls deserve so much more than what regular curriculum is offering them. So the Waldorf curriculum, developed by Rudolf Steiner, really talks about how when we're teaching children, they learn through song and play and nature, and they deserve an integral education, not only to their mind and to their heart and to their hands for creativity, but also to their full soul. And by seeing a soul in a child, you can educate them not by giving them knowledge, but by awakening their ability to educate themselves. Beautiful, right? Isn't that gorgeous? And so when I'm coming around to Waldorf this second time around, I'm not just focusing on how play-based and song-based and art-based this curriculum is, but also how spirituality-based and respectful religion-based this curriculum is. And of course, if I learn something, I immediately want to use it on myself. So I started teaching myself through music, and I started teaching myself through story. And I started developing, Waldorf style curriculums to implement in a classroom. And through all of that work, I started realizing that the philosophy of Rudolf Steiner includes a lot of things that, okay, so now I'm not going to talk about him anymore. I'm going to talk about my feelings because I don't want you to think that this is about his shit. But here's my shit around it. What brought this up was there's also some psychological elements to play that exist in a lot of different curriculums and exist in early childhood psychology, where children process through play and they take in information from the world around them, and then they act out different parts of themselves, which there's also part theory for adults. That's the grown-up version. But in the play version, we're seeing children play pretend and practice things like, violence and arguments and family and school and all of these different, institutions and relationships and things that we're projecting on them really get processed through their ability to play pretend and their ability to express themselves in a way that isn't exactly in line with who they are, but what they're experimenting with as a person and what they're wrestling with. I think it's so beautiful. I've also just been around children more lately, so I've been seeing it more. I think it's amazing. But here's what I noticed. And this is how it ties into communication. My background before, doing early childhood education was doing adult emotional education. And communication is really what I like to talk about and feast on. And communication is really how I process a lot of information. I'm super into communication. It's kind of a lot of my career and how we keep the electricity running so that I can make videos is because of communication. So blessed by it. And so what I'm kind of wrestling with is this idea that adults sometimes are not dropped in enough to their experience in order to understand that they're in communication. And instead of being in communication and in connection, which I think is really the meat of it, let's use that word instead. Instead of being in their connection in the moment, they are instead in their play. They're playing. They're processing this stuff by acting out of places that are not necessarily in alignment with who they are, but what they're experimenting with right now as a way to process situations. So there is a huge parallel between how I see, children actively outwardly processing in their play state and how I see adults actively outwardly processing in their regular relationships and not in an experimental space. And my curiosity is, and I see this in therapy, there's a lot of situations where you're playing with puppets or you try on, contradictions where the therapist will act like they're the person that you would like to talk to, or you will act like the person that you would like to talk to, and you just play around and experiment with it in that way, which is something I've seen in therapy. And so I'm wondering if having access to that play helps people process their communication and their connection more. And to bring it full circle, I'll kind of just close this out now, actually. Play is super important. Play is how we process, but I also really want to invite people to drop into their connection so that they're not playing with people that they love and they're not playing with relationships in their lives. And one of the antidotes to that, I also speak from experience, first of all. Like, I have been there. I remember very vividly, especially when I was traumatized, running away from home, experiencing a lot of social situations where I needed to depend on people and I didn't know how. And instead of dropping into my connection and communication with those people, I was playing out scripts. I was playing out relationship dynamics. I was in a state of play, right? Shadow play, like dark play, not super fun family in the kitchen play where I'm using my easy bake oven and this apron is way too big for me and it's cute. But play where I actually don't see that the person in front of me is a real person. I see them as an archetype, or I see them as an energy, or I see them as a role that I then act from a part of me. When in reality, dropping into the connection, whether it's safe or not, might be a good way to determine how I want to handle that situation instead of automatically reverting to this is unsafe and playing that game. So that's a little bit of my piece of that and my ownership of that part of myself that I am so glad I am mostly leaving behind. I can't say that it's gone forever because I know that healing is not linear, right? But at least I'm far enough away from it to notice it. And I'm really blessed that Waldorf was what led me there. It's so funny to me how these teachings, and here's the deal, Rudolf Steiner had a lot of good shit to say about how to see people as people. What's the name of it's called something. Anthroposophy. When I was just reading about it earlier, when this started coming up for me, I didn't realize that he had invented a philosophy. You know, it's just a synchronicity, it's all. So I say all that to say this. Try communicating effectively. Try dropping into your connection with people. Try to realize when you're playing and when you're not. I'll do the same. I also notice playing is kind of fun. In my relationship, my romantic relationship, we play. Sometimes we try on different personalities and we talk about, like, hey, I want to be really needy right now, which is something that they taught me. I did not pick that shit up on my own. They taught me that. And I love it. It opens up all these different worlds. Cool. Happy full moon, everyone. So glad to drop in for a little bit. I'm going to go eat a delicious lunch. Mwah. I'm sending you lots of love.